Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today I am excited to come at you guys again with another legendary creature from M20, and this time it is Omnath, Locus of the Roil. So Omnath is one in-teamer, green, blue, and red for 3/3 that has a bunch of interesting effects. Like I said, this Omnath, more so than the past two, cares so much about elementals. The last two kind of just, they cared about lands. This one, it really does depend on having a lot of elementals in the deck. So when it enters the battlefield, it can deal damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. So right there, it has that ETB. You're going to want to be able to play this, flicker it, do a number of things to get that ability to trigger, or just have so many elementals that you can do enough damage to make it worth it. That second effect is whenever a land enters the battlefield, so essentially a landfall trigger, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a target elemental you control, and then if you control 8 or more lands, you also can draw a card. So clearly this is going to push us into a direction now. This commander does very strictly push you in a very hard elemental direction with some, lands matters, landfall type cards that you want in here. So while it does pigeonhole us a little, we'll try to get our own little take on it and see how we can make this as fun and effective as a commander as we can. Right away, like I said, we see tons of elemental synergies, we see some landfall synergies, and we do see some +1/+1 counter synergies. So kind of taking advantage of all that, we can make a deck where it's just going to have a bunch of fat elementals, just huge, just face-beating elementals swinging away, and then we can keep refilling with that card draw trigger. And that's kind of the nice thing about this is you want to have a lot of elementals on the battlefield, so you're going to be playing out your hand a lot. That card draw trigger, especially in the late game, will allow us to get value of those late game lands, to keep drawing elementals, to keep the engine going. Now for this deck, it should be pretty obvious. We're going to stuff this deck full of all the elementals we can that are in Teamer, and especially all the good ones. So instead of just reading you a list of elementals, you guys can go check out the deck list to see all the elementals I'm including. I'm going to talk about some of the cool card synergies I'm going to put in the deck through this deck tech that work with these elementals to kind of put a sort of, my own take on it and to show how you can get that elemental engine running. So taking a look at the creatures, like I said, I'm not really going to talk about much of the elementals. I'm going to talk about the other cards that are going to synergize the best with these. And the first one I have to talk about is Deadeye Navigator. Deadeye Navigator is awesome because our commander does have that ETB. And we don't want to have to worry about letting our commander die off and then recasting it again and recasting it again. While this deck does have a lot of ramp and we are going to be ramping very hard, it's so much more efficient to just pair it up with the Deadeye Navigator, pay 2 mana, just start flickering it, and we can start dealing damage everywhere. We can pick off creatures, we can pick off planeswalkers, or we can just start throwing this damage at people's faces. Another card I love is Evolution Sage. Now, Evolution Sage is going to do so much of what we want to do. It has that landfall trigger, which is already synergizing with exactly what our commander wants to do. And on top of that, it's proliferating. We're throwing +1 counters on these elementals, and we want them to get real big, real fast, and this is going to do it for us. This is great early game. If you get a couple elementals out, you can start building them up, and in late game, when you already have those +1 counters spread out, this could just build it up so big that your board will be tough to deal with. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, these elementals are going to have all these +1 counters on them. They're all big and scary and everything, but they can just chump block them. Well, not if we play Herald of Secret Streams. Herald of Secret Streams is awesome, and in any deck with +1 counter synergies, you want them in there. Because it's going to make all your creatures with +1 counters unblockable. Forget even trample, they're unblockable. And again, I've talked about this card before, and kind of how the best way to use it is you build up this army, make people feel safe. They see this giant army of elementals, all these +1 counters, and a lot of cool effects and everything, but they're kind of calculating in their head. I can block here, I can block here. If they give it trample, I can do this and this. They won't be thinking about your entire board being unblockable. And the fact that it only costs 4 mana, you can do this out of nowhere and just take somebody out. The next one isn't an elemental itself, but it's going to just basically just poop out elementals, for lack of a better word. It is Master of Waves. This is awesome. Now, I realize it cares about basically blue mana symbols, and in this deck, there's not a ton of blue mana symbols. But the best way to look at it is you're always getting at least one. And really, the harder you lean into blue in this deck, the better Master of Waves is going to be. But even if you play it and you only get maybe 3 or 4 elementals, that is still amazing because that's 3 or 4 extra damage triggers that you get to throw into your commander's ETB. Not to mention, at the very least, he works as an elemental lord, so you're always going to have that value. But best case scenario, it has a super high ceiling, and even its floor, that Anthem effect could be really useful. And the next one I'm going to talk about is Tatyova. Tatyova is amazing in this deck. Essentially, it's going to double your commander's ability as far as the landfalls, drawing cards. Like I said, we want to play out lots of elementals, so we need to be able to refill our hands. And in a deck that cares about ramping, Tatyova is going to make sure our hands are always full. Life gain's not too bad either, but this card does amazing, especially if we have this and our commander out. We can draw all these cards, and it makes those late game land drops so many times, especially in commander games. You get to the very late game, you don't need any more lands. You have so many lands and play you top deck a land late, and it's just disappointing. Not if you have either Omnath or Tatyova out. Essentially, it's just going to be, oh, I'm going to play it and just draw another card, and with some of the effects, we have to play extra lands. Even if you draw 2 lands in a row, you can still just keep fishing for what you need to win you the game late. Now, like I said, check out the deck list. There's a bunch of elementals. It may seem strange that I'm not specifically pointing them out, but essentially, like I said, you go on EDH, right? You can just type in elementals, and essentially the top 10 or 15 that pop up most popular are the ones we put in here. It's not like we're going to be really tricky. We're just putting the best elementals we can find. So I figured, like I said, I wanted to focus on some of those cards that to go and gather, search elementals. The cards I wanted to point out are stuff you might not see immediately that kind of help the deck run and help everything kind of just gel together. Looking at the instance, the first one I'm going to talk about is Ghostly Flicker. Ghostly Flicker has a lot of versatility in this deck. You can use it to protect stuff. If somebody targets your stuff, you can flicker it, protect it. But really the ideal use is going to be to use it on either your lands or your creatures, and specifically your commander. With the lands, you get those extra landfall triggers, which is great. You know, it re-enters, you can draw cards. If it's late game, you can put +1 counters if you need to. Or for your commander, you can flicker it so that you're dealing damage based on your elementals. Like I said, mentioned with Deadeye Navigator, we want to be able to flicker our commander rather than having to recast it over and over again to get that ETB trigger and take full advantage of that. I only put a few flicker effects in here. I didn't go overboard, but going heavy, because blue does have a lot of these flicker effects, going heavy into flicker isn't a bad idea. Because then you only need 3 or 4 elementals, and you keep doing that over and over again, that damage can then add up and become much more threatening. The other instant I'm going to talk about is Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi. This is such a cool card. It's a 5-mana instant. You get to put 9 +1/+1 counters onto a land, and guess what? It becomes an elemental. So you get a massive elemental for 5 mana, plus it has +1 counters. Let's see what I mean. Plus it has +1 counters. So yeah, it has these +1 counters also, so it synergizes with all of that as well. Just an awesome card. And if you get a 9/9 for 5 mana, and you use a land to do it, since we're going to have all these lands out, it is just an awesome, awesome effect to have in this deck. Looking at the artifacts, the 2 most important ones are going to be, 1, Panharmonicon. Obviously, we have these ETBs. We want to make sure that we can get all the value off that commander trigger that we can. To be honest, when I'm looking at Omnath, that +1 counter that we're placing and the card draw is the most interesting part to me, but we want max value off that ETB. We want to be, basically it's free damage. We're casting and it's going to enter. We might as well throw that damage somewhere. We might as well get as much value as we can. Panharmonicon does a great job of that. The other artifact I have to point out is Vanquisher's Banner. This is going to do something similar to what I talked about with Tatyova. Like I said, we're trying to dump our hands, get as many elementals out as we can, and the best way to do this is to make sure we have a full hand. With Vanquisher's Banner, every time we cast an elemental, we get to draw a card. And basically refilling your hand, one of the most dangerous things you can do in a deck like this is play out your whole hand, get really excited, get all these elementals, cast them all, and then a board wipe happens. You got nothing in hand, and you just have nothing to do. Your commander is based off of having other elementals on the battlefield, and you're just in a bad spot. Now, one way to do that is to hold back. You don't just play out your hand. You only play it a few at a time. But with cards like Vanquisher's Banner, you can keep drawing cards every time you cast your elementals. So essentially, you don't have to worry about holding back as much because your hand's just refilling and refilling so fast. The +1/+1 effect on it is just kind of an added bonus to it, but that card draw is really what's important about this card. Looking at the enchantments, the first one I'm going to talk about is Burgeoning. I love this card. It's insane how powerful it is, and in a deck like this, I actually am choosing to run it over Exploration. Well, of course, you could run both if you wanted, but Burgeoning is great because we have a good amount of card draw, especially with our commander, with some of the effects we have. We can get a handful of cards. And to have the potential to play 4 lands per round to the table with all the opponents you have in a commander game is ridiculous, especially because you could be drawing cards off of those lands. So if you think about it with a Burgeoning early game, it's insane because you can just ramp so hard so early. You can get an advantage that never goes away. Essentially, you can just run out too far ahead for people to catch up. But late game, it's great too. It's a 1-drop, but it has so much value late game because you can get hands full of cards, keep dropping lands, keep drawing cards off the triggers, and keep throwing +1 counters on all your elementals as well. This can get ridiculous so fast and for 1 green mana. Another card I love is Elemental Mastery. This card is awesome, so you can enchant one of your elementals, especially once they start getting big, and then tap it to make X 1/1 elementals worth its power. And then at the end of the turn, that whatever creature you enchanted is going to go away. But the thing about this is in certain points of the game, we won't care. Sometimes you need to sneak in damage. And there's plenty of effects in this deck that we care about just having a lot of creatures in play, not necessarily having one huge creature. So if you get that one giant elemental with all these +1 counters and it can't get in for damage, this is a great way to turn it basically into fuel for everything else. If you get a big 10-10, or let's just go back. Look at that V2 guys we just talked about, that 9/9. You put this on and get 9 elementals. All of a sudden, your commander's entering, dealing 10 damage. And with flicker effects, that gets dangerous fast, and it is a great way to get around having to use combat to win the game. I also love Hadana's Climb. Hadana's Climb is an awesome card. I love so many of the flip into land cards. They're just so cool to me. The art's amazing, but on top of that, the effect is too. Essentially, we're going to have lots of +1 counters, so it's very easy to get this card to flip. And like I mentioned before, we don't have a ton of trample enablers. I already talked about unblockable. Well, this is a way to give it flying and double the creature's power once it transforms, which won't be hard to do. And the fact that that effect is on a land makes it so hard to remove. When I first saw this card, it didn't excite me too much. I played it a few times, and the amount of power that it has and how good you feel when you can just double one of your creature's powers every turn and give it flying, it gets dangerous, especially with all the +1 counters we're throwing around. The last one I'm going to talk about, Zendikar Roil, is awesome in this deck. It does everything we want. Because lands enter, you get to create an elemental. If your commander's out, you're drawing cards, putting +1 counters, and creating more elementals. And the coolest thing is it's a land ETB, landfall. It's not when you play a land. So all these ramp sorceries and stuff where lands are getting just thrown into the battlefield, we're going to get so many elementals getting all these tokens and making our commander that much more dangerous. And like I said with the flicker effects, you can get an army of all these elementals with your commander already out, and then sneak in a flicker effect to just smack somebody in the face for a whole lot of damage someone might not have seen coming. Looking at the sorceries, just one word, ramp. Lots of ramp. We're running Cultivate, we're running Kodama's Reach, we're running Boundless Realms. We just want as much ramp as possible, especially the sorcery ramp, because it gets so many lands into the battlefield. It gets us so far ahead land-wise, and with all the value we get from having all those lands enter, and with having all that mana available to us to just keep casting elementals and keep playing lands, drawing cards, all that kind of those engines that I've been talking about, you need a lot of ramp to get that going, and this sorcery slot is where we put most of it. Looking at the planeswalkers, we're running Chandra, Flamecaller, and Nissa Vital Force. Essentially, these just give us engines to get value, keep creating more elemental tokens, and then basically their other effects are kind of just gravy on top. We're really just worried about repeatable elemental engines. And why I picked these two specifically is those other effects do also happen to be awesome. Chandra is essentially allowing you to do a little mini wheel effect, and the fact that Nissa is so close to her ult to start, and if you do get that emblem, you're drawing even more cards when lands are entering, and that's the type of engine, especially because it's an emblem, that you might just be able to outvalue people and they might not be able to do anything about it. Looking at the lands, there's nothing super exciting here. It's pretty basic. What I will say is throw as many fetch lands as you can. You see the way I built it? I kind of did it somewhat budget. I'm not throwing all the fancy fetch lands in. I'm just talking about run a Terramorphic Expanse, run Evolving Wilds, and then basically any other fetch lands you can throw in there, great. We have enough sorcery-based ramped and everything like that where you don't need to worry about filling it with fetch lands, but if you have any extras, if anybody just has extra fetch lands laying around, go ahead and throw them in there too, because those extra landfall triggers are awesome if you're able to do it. The one land I will specifically point out is Kessig Wolfrun. This land is awesome, especially in a deck where we're going to have a lot of creatures that are getting pretty big that don't inherently have trample. This is a great way to not only pump them, but give them trample. And again, when you can have those effects, like I talked about with the Hadana's Climb, those type of effects on lands are crazy and so hard to deal with. All right, so that's going to do it with all the categories. Now we got to get on to the best part, the game-winning step. How are we winning the game? And I've kind of hinted at a few of these, but our primary way is going to just to be flood the board with elementals, and this is going to create a variety of win cons. If we flood the board with elementals, we might be able to kill people with our commander ETBs, but in all likelihood, the best way is going to be flood with elementals, play our lands, make them huge, and swing. There's a lot of different effects we can use to take advantage of this. Like I talked about, we have Herald of Secret Streams that can just make everything unblockable that have +1 counters and just swing away and kill people. I was ashamed. Last week, I don't think I put any Infect in the deck, and it hurt me. So obviously, I had to come back this week, make up for it, and run Triumph of the Hordes as an amazing win con in this deck. It's going to make our elementals even bigger, give them all Infect, and with all the +1 counters we're putting out, getting 10 Infect onto somebody won't be that difficult. Another great way to win the game in this deck is a great way to win the game in so many decks. It's Perforce. Perforce is great in this deck because it's another way to get in non-combat damage. We have enough cards, like an Avenger of Zendikar, or like the Zendikar's Roil we talked about, that create a ton of tokens that, while it's not inherently a token deck, if you have a Perforce out, because it's hard to remove, you might be able to just get one of these other effects in, create a whole bunch of tokens out of nowhere, and just knock out the whole table. And this isn't even mentioning the incremental value Perforce is going to have in a deck where we just keep casting elementals over and over again. Those first couple ways are going to be the primary ways to do it. We want lots of elementals, either smacking people or getting that ETB from our commander, or we want to use something like Perforce to get value incrementally or have an explosive turn with creatures entering. Now this next thing is kind of just like an honorary mention. This card doesn't win you the game, but it's going to put you in such an insane position with some of the synergies in this deck that it's the runner-up. It's not winning the game, but it's doing that step right before it. So this is an honorary how to win the game. It's Scape Shift. Scape Shift in this deck is so good with so many different ways because, it's just getting us there quicker. If we have our commander out, we Scape Shift, we can get so many landfall triggers, put so many +1 counters out, it makes that overrunning the board happen that much quicker. If we have that Perforce out, we got that Zendikar's Roil, we Scape Shift, there's going to be enough elementals just getting thrown onto the battlefield to Perforce trigger and get rid of everyone. Just the way it enables so many of the win cons in this deck to get there so much faster and so effectively, I just felt like it would be wrong to leave it out of this game-winning step. That's going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I think this is a really cool deck. Of all the Omnaths, I have actually played Mono Green Omnath. I never really played Omnath Locus of Rage. This one is one of the stranger ones to me. It's definitely not as powerful as the last two, but I really love the elemental synergies. I really like how, while it pushes you in a direction, it does a variety of things with those elementals. Now, you can go on a deck where your entire focus is just flickering, and you just want to get elementals out, keep flickering and just dealing damage that way. You can make a full landfall deck with this commander and really just focus on getting a few elementals out, take advantage of the landfall triggers to make a couple things big and draw cards. There's a whole lot of different things you can do. I feel like I wanted to get a good balance of taking advantage of all those effects and kind of, get value from all aspects of the card. But yes, let me know what you think. As always, we love all our patrons so much. We really appreciate y'all. And I'm not going to tell you what's coming next week, but be excited. In for a treat next week. So, yeah, get the hype going now. But I will see y'all next time. Also, my cat is a psycho, so I apologize for the mischief that was happening. There may have been noises happening. There may have been a cat face in the middle of the screen. There may have been a vicious cat attack mid-video. Yeah, I can't control him. He runs the house, so sorry. One counter, so it synergizes with the other stuff we're doing as well. Barkley! That's the type of engine, especially... Look at the land base, nothing super exciting here. The one thing I will say is, put as many fetch lands as you can, and... Oh my gosh, Barkley, stop! Looking at the land base, there's nothing too exciting here. The one thing... Looking at the land base, there's nothing... Oh my gosh. Looking at the land base, there's nothing super exciting here. It's basically... Oh my gosh. Barkley! This card just enables so many of the strategies. Barkley, you have to get out of the camera shot. You're biting me. This cat is a monster. Barkley, stop. Out of the camera shot. And you... Ow! That's my hand. Oh my gosh. You're just chewing on me now. Please stop. Oh my gosh. This was kind of a balance of them with